Good morning, listeners. My name is Micah.
And my name is Christian. Welcome to the Morning Ponderings podcast.
This is a podcast where two guys get up early in the morning and try to have some deep conversations about very complicated things of life.
Yes, it is the reason for our caffeine addiction. And maybe the reason for yours if you're up this early. So,
Yeah.
I doubt it. You're probably listening later in the day. But
Yeah,
anyways, our goal is
probably.
that empathy for others shall flourish through the conversations that we have, hopefully respectfully, just exploring the possibilities of many different topics and things. And as of thus far within the existence of our podcast, it's been looking at theology and religion and how that has affected and continues to affect our lives. Maybe someday we'll branch away from that, but that's kind of been what it has been recently. It's just one of the most relevant things in our lives.
Seems to be the thing that consumes you, whether you're in it or leaving it, I guess. Or not leaving it necessarily, but, you know, it just is a big part of
Kind
who
of
you are.
putting it
Which,
on hold.
as a teaser for what we're talking about later, kind of ties a lot into who you are and your identity. So,
Yeah.
But we'll get there. Before we get there, how's your morning, Christian? How you doing?
It's good. My wife, it's her first day back at work after maternity leave. So the house is without my wife and my 2-year-old. My mother-in-law is here. She is watching our newborn while my wife is at work and I'm working. So we are extremely grateful to her for that. So yeah,
Nice.
It was a pretty smooth morning, all things considered.
All right.
How's your morning been?
Well, I got 5 hours of sleep last night. So I surprisingly woke up pretty well, but I know later today I'm going to be feeling that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help that I work late into the night. I mean, by late, I mean like 10 p.m. And then like I've got stuff to do. I've got a wife to hang out with. And there are a bunch of positions open at Costco right now for full time. And I'm like, I need to get one of those. So I was working
one of those.
I was working on my resume, cover letters so that I can submit that probably today. Even though I really don't want to go in today because today's my day off and I had 8 days in a row where I worked and I like don't want to go in that place today.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go there either.
I also want to get the job, so I don't know. I'll probably go in today and just be like, whatever.
Yep, the things we have to do to survive. Yeah. There's a lot of juggling that happens in life. Just so many roles and responsibilities, and it's like, how is this possible? My wife and I constantly lament upon like just looking back in human history and how there was a time when it was literally like just a community, like you lived with your family to some extent, or at least very near your family. And there was always somebody there to help watch the kids or to spread out responsibilities and work. Yeah. And it really sucks that we're now living in a society where that's not necessarily the norm.
Yeah. You know, I've actually been thinking about that because I have a video that's kind of blowing up right now talking about how like our society just pushes individualism so hard to the point that now when we get older, it's like harder to have friends because that has been so ingrained in us that like it's good to be individual. It's good to like be on your own, meet your own needs, like all this stuff, which I think is now ridiculous. Like at first it was like, oh yeah, like don't be a burden to other people. But I think we're supposed to be that way. Like I think we are social and communal creatures that like need each other, and that's actually what makes us a strong, like I don't want to say species, but like yeah, like that's what makes us strong. But then, you know, me and my good anti-capitalist mind thinks like, well, if you're isolated, it's a lot easier to be exploited by employers because you don't have the power of a community behind you to like make change. Oof, man. So anyway, so I wonder how much that plays into capitalism. Probably more than I think.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's a big mess of a system, isn't it? Yeah, I was thinking about how, like, I remember watching your video and just reflecting upon, like, man, I've I've have these like this desire within me to be a part of a community, but I am so poorly equipped to actually, I feel like, effectively engage in a community. Like I've
Yeah.
grown so used to individuality, and I've grown so I've
Yeah.
never developed those skills to be intentional about like keeping in touch and being intentional about putting together times to spend time with other people outside of my kids and my wife, and like
Yeah.
probably with them like in those spaces. So, and especially in like this transition period of life, which you and I have talked about, still haven't. I think it's
Yeah.
still in the process of my wife bringing
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
out. But yeah. So, especially in this transition period of life, it's like, man, it's just the ongoing struggle of community.
Yeah. And what's so weird is like the church is like was supposed to be that, but even in the church there still was like yeah, like you still were kind of ill-equipped to like have very deep community.
Mm-hmm.
Um and there are many reasons for that, and I think part of that is like everybody kind of feeling like they have to put on this face of like I have my
Mm-hmm.
life and stuff put together when you don't. Like nobody does. And then you also have like just like it's nice that you have like that set time every week where I'm gonna go see people, but then at the same time, it's just so easy to a lot of the times just like go in, go out, and then like you didn't really have any kind of community experience, which to me, doesn't that defeat the purpose of church if you're not actually having any
Mm-hmm.
kind of communal experience besides just like singing some songs together and listening to one guy talk at you?
Mm-hmm.
I
And
don't
it's
know.
difficult in those environments, like when things can become politically charged. Like
Yeah.
it that's one thing that I feel like I've seen in a lot of different sects of Christianity recently, is that just about everything is super politically charged. And although I
Hmm.
think there's an extent to which like that's important because social issues are political to some extent. And as Christians, like the whole idea is to be social. It's funny how Christianity feels like it's supposed to be the social justice kind of movement, but there's such a
Yeah.
resistance to social justice within Christianity,
Yeah.
like within the church
Yeah.
itself. Um, so that's a bit of a pain in the butt, but it's like,
Yeah.
so there's that healthy amount of politicalness, but then there's the excessiveness where suddenly you're labeling and identifying everybody as this one thing, or you're looking down upon them. It's just another one of those needless systems of superiority. It's just something I've been talking a lot
Yeah.
about lately. But
Yeah.
there's
Well,
just so many systems like that within the church that it's hard to be a part of that community. You're always having to walk on eggshells.
yeah. Well, the church already very much in America thinks in binaries and thinks in a black and white, in a in crowd, out crowd. And so, politicizing things just makes it that much easier. And then we forget that like these issues, I mean, maybe I feel like they just forget that like these issues like are really helping or hurting actual people. Like these aren't just like ideas that like you need to fight for. Like these are people's lives at stake oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
Especially people who are like very disadvantaged. Like all the political things we decide are like really like affecting them a lot more than people who are maybe living pretty comfortably. Like people like are complaining about like gas prices and stuff, which actually doesn't have anything to do with politics because that's
Mm-hmm.
capitalism at work if you do any amount of research anyway. But like most people who are complaining about that have the perfect like are probably financially okay with paying more for
Mm-hmm.
gas. They're just like mad about it when like people who don't have money for that like that actually would affect their lives. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff I feel like we complain about that's like we're just complaining about it out of our privilege and out of feeling like, oh, but like this is my
Mm-hmm.
money and like I hate that whatever, but forget that like, oh, but there's other people that this is affecting a lot more. And like if I care about making this country any better, then like those are the people that need to be helped.
Yeah. There's this extreme disconnect between a lot of people within the church and within the like spaces of privilege
Yeah.
and the real social issues that other people are facing who are maybe not as well off, who are maybe being marginalized, who maybe their health is not the best or their mental health isn't the best. And there's such a lack of understanding and empathy. Like, I think one of the
Yeah.
big reasons why such a huge part of the movement for like decolonization is simply to just stop and listen is because there's so much ignorance. And
Yeah.
people then take that ignorance to the voting polls, and people then take that ignorance into society and into the way they treat people and into the
Yeah.
way they treat like a waitress or a waiter. And it's just,
Yeah.
it's frustrating.
Yeah. It is. It's very frustrating.
So to
So,
veer away
yeah.
from politics, unless you had something more you wanted to dive into.
Nope, I was about to veer us away and just get into, is there anything that's happened in the last, I know it's only been like a few days since we've talked, but anything
Yeah.
notable in your life, just in general,
Oh,
that's
well, I
happened?
mean, there's one thing I want to mention, and then you can share what's happened in your week, and then I think we'll talk about the review that was left, and then we'll talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
we'll probably segue from there into the topic. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. So this week, I finally decided to take my own advice. Like, I constantly encourage people and say there's absolutely no shame in seeing a therapist and working on your mental health. But I'd always said that from a place of having never done that myself. I finally
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
I have finally started to see a
Okay.
therapist. And
Very
the only
cool.
reason I hadn't before is because I was just super lazy and really am bad at making time for that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I've had my first session with a therapist, and it wasn't really like a very like active session, I guess you could say. It was more like a, hey, tell
Yeah.
me about yourself and what your goals are, kind of the whole establishing part of therapy, and then
Yeah.
also putting together the bits that are necessary for insurance, which are kind of weird. But
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so
Very cool.
I'm
Is
excited
it
to
an in
see where that
person
goes.
or virtual?
It's in person, and it's in
Oh,
like a
nice.
space where there's a fair amount of space for like the whole pandemic and everything, to like, we're not sitting super close together or anything. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Nice, that's awesome. Yeah, I've done therapy multiple times for different reasons. Obviously, with all the belief change and life transitions and all that, like seeing a therapist was helpful during those seasons. But I never could find one in the area, so I just had to do virtual, which I think in person is probably better. But good for you, good for you. And
Yeah.
also, like I hear from many people, it's hard to find a like good therapists, and sometimes you might have to go through a few, and like there's no shame in that. And so also like I'm not trying to like project this onto your situation, but like if you feel that like I don't know if this is gonna work out,
Mm.
there's no shame in like trying to find something, like don't feel like you're attached to this person, because I
Yes.
definitely felt guilty of that even though I had no reason to. It's
Yeah.
just
I definitely
me.
feel I have a healthy, I feel like a healthy amount of being cautious in that, like, my therapist, they are a Christian, and it's within a Christian context. Like, the organization that does it is Christian, and
Mhm.
so I have my caution regarding that, especially just coming from my walk of life.
Yeah,
And I feel like, and I don't, I want to be very careful not to project my expectations onto my therapist of like how he views the world, and
yeah,
uh, as though it were the same as the way I used to view the world, and that he wouldn't be able
yeah,
to non-biasly help me deal with my issues. So I don't want to project that onto him, but I'm aware of it, so I'm keeping an eye out
yeah.
for it.
Good, that's
But
good.
yeah.
Yeah, because I'm not trying to discourage you in any way, but
Oh,
let me
I
tell a
get you.
story. I mean, for one, I would say I think most therapists, maybe this is I think this is just based on like prior knowledge, but like if they're gonna be a therapist, they're gonna be a little less of probably the Christians that we used to be, because they believe in therapy, and so like
Hmm.
that's good. That's a good thing. But there was this one time, actually, it was right whenever our deconstruction started, and my wife started seeing a therapist just to like kind of like help with that, like just for her. And this therapist literally like gave her testimony to my wife and like tried to like reconvert her. And my wife was like so angry. And it was like that was like the
Mm,
worst thing you could have done. And so, obviously stopped that immediately.
mm,
But that was like just such a weird, like, in what kind of training do you have that, like, you just completely ignore the needs of, like, this person
mhm.
who's like, "Hey, I don't think I believe in any of this anymore." It's like, "Oh, well, here, let me share with you my testimony so I can try to reconvert you." It's like, what are you doing? Like, this isn't some mission field. Like, you need to, like, help her
Mm.
with her anxiety that she's feeling right now. Whatever.
Yep, not add to it.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was ridiculous. We were mad. Like,
Mm. I mean, it
so,
might be
I
my
don't know.
ego, but
Watch out for that, but
yeah, man, it might be my ego, but like if my therapist were to try to do that sort of thing with me, I, the sadist or no, the masochist, I don't know what the word is, sadist in me would probably come out and I would challenge them on that. I would
you
worry for
Hey,
I would
listen, man.
worry for them.
Did you know? No,
I
just,
might
like,
cause
start
you
going in.
a faith crisis.
You're
Uh
gonna just, like, start a debate right there, like, "Welcome to therapy, I'm about to debate you." Like,
right? You're gonna need some therapy after this one. Oh
oh,
man.
man.
And I don't know. I would be so
Nice. Well,
tempted to do
anyway,
that.
that just, like,
Yeah.
brought out some memories, but good. I'm
So
glad you're doing that. Therapy is great. I really hope it's good for you. It
yeah.
was really good for me in the times that I needed it, and so good job
Yes.
taking that initiative, taking that step.
Yay.
Mental
Yeah.
health is important.
I will say this for listeners' sake. Like if it does come down to that and there's this back and forth and I'm challenging my therapist in that way, I'm a safe space for that sort of challenge to take place in. And that if he genuinely desires to maintain his faith in God and Christianity, I've dove into that quite a bit. I think that there's a valid way to go about that, and I can help him in that. So I'm not just
Uh,
out. I'm just not out to destroy people's faith in Christianity. I'm out to challenge people with the intention for me personally to learn, honestly. And if you happen to learn from it as somebody that is trying to teach me, then that's, I think, just added benefit.
yeah.
But I realized it kind of might have come across as, oh yeah, I'm going to, if he brings that up, I'm going to destroy his faith. No, no, that's not what I'm
No,
getting at.
it's not our goal. Not our goal.
Hmm.
But nice.
Yeah. So how has
So
your
it,
week been? Like on the flip side of things.
yeah, it's been crazy. So we finally like signed the papers on our house on Tuesday.
Woo!
So we have a house. So if you saw that our episode is out late, it was because of all of the madness of that for me as the editor. So
Well, it was
um,
also because of like I had a lot going on.
yeah, we both have a lot going on, and we
Oh
we
yeah.
didn't have a great timeline for that last release time, but that's okay.
Yes. We're
Better one,
shooting this one super early. So
yeah,
hopefully life might get crazy and who knows, it might still come out late. But we're gonna aim for that
probably
not to be
not.
the case. We're trying
Well,
to build a backlog.
yeah. Anyway, so that's exciting today, which I guess like by the time y'all hear this, I'm gonna have the house for a while. But I get the keys, and because like he wanted to stay a couple extra days, it's like a weird thing with the market right now. People are doing that, and it's like this weird like trust thing of like, yeah, you're not gonna trash the house, right? Because like I own it now,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully. Anyway, so we get to go see it tonight. We're gonna go rip out the carpet because it smells really bad in his house, and he
Mm.
had animals and there's stains in the carpet. So we know what happened. We're
Mm-hmm.
definitely ripping out that carpet. But that
Best of
was
luck getting
wild.
rid of the smell.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gonna. We're really hoping. We've got some diffusers. We'll be all right. There's only carpet in 2 rooms, and so like once you get that out, then it's just like us living there and kind of getting that smell out. we're not going to live there for a bit because we're going to do a lot of renovations, and so we'll get to just like maybe leave the windows open a bit, so just let some airflow like get it out. But that's super exciting. I'm a homeowner now, which is just crazy, very exciting. Yeah. And let's see what else. Just with that, lots of decisions to be made, like we're replacing the cabinets. And so it's like, what we decided on countertop today, not today, this week. And like we decided on a bunch of paint colors, even though like we need to test them out still. Like it's just been, it's been a whirlwind. And
Mm.
then like also like now trying to get this like full-time, like actual full-time job. Like I'm working full-time hours, but that's because it's seasonal period. I want like I need that job security of full-time.
Yeah. Hmm.
So
It's kind of nice to have that, and it's kind of sucks to not. So best of luck to you there.
yeah, for sure. So that is like most of my week, at least like the last few days. I mean, the house is kind of consuming my life at this point. So,
Mm.
and it's going to for a bit, but that's okay.
Indeed. Sounds like an
Yeah.
exciting and stressful time of life.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Before we get to the review, I did
Hmm.
want to comment a little on the last episode,
Yeah.
just because there were some things that like I was trying to process through like after our conversation,
Hmm.
because like during that conversation there were like something about like certain parts of it like kind of made me uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it was like our conversations about like faith and stuff, and like as we talked about that, like it was kind of bringing out, like I guess the idea that the amount of faith we have is only what God gives us.
Mm.
um and I think like what you were saying was like helpful, is like like whatever faith you have is valid, and it's like, well, I agree with that, I guess, regardless of whether or not God gives it to you, and that's like good, and that's good to like encourage people in. But it was still like it was almost like bringing me back to like my Calvinist days of like almost this like
Mm.
determinate, like God has like determined this thing for you and just like given it to you, rather than like me kind of like carving my own path, I guess. um
Yeah.
and
There was I actually made a TikTok video recently on that very topic of like this new understanding of faith that I kind of came to. And one of my followers commented on it. And I feel like the way that he took it and was, uh, well, the way he kind of processed it, which was totally valid, it reminds me of, I feel like, the way that you also processed it, and that it kind of like there's this freedom that you feel whenever you're in this place of life where there's like not necessarily a faith that has been thrusted upon you, and then to
mm,
then suggest that like, oh, that is intentional by God, you're still within God's plan, it kind of robs you of that individuality. It's like, oh, so now I'm still within this framework and I'm still not my
yeah,
own person, and I don't have ownership of my life even now. Is
yeah,
that kind of where it struck you
I
in
think
a similar
somewhat.
place?
I think somewhat, and I think also like I don't think I like really expressed this, and like, but like I guess like I just don't think, for me, like if God exists, I don't think that that would be the case. That like I think like for me, like in my understanding of what God could be, I see it very much as like even with like the Bible and like things that were written, is like that was like our human, like the evolution of like human understanding of spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily, how do I say it?
Orchestrated
I
by
don't
God,
I
guided.
guess so, and like at the same time, like I think that they got things wrong, and I think we're
Mm-hmm.
still like evolving and like coming to new understandings, and I don't necessarily know that that is like guided by a god.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe it is, but like I just don't know, anyway. So
I
like,
mean, I think I know what you're getting at, in that like maybe it's all made up, maybe it isn't. And if it isn't all made up, then maybe they just witnessed these things that happened and then read into those things what they believed. And so
yeah,
just
yeah.
interpret it in a way that just further affirmed whatever understanding or framework they had at the time.
Yeah, and and I think you see, if you like read the Bible all the way through, that like it kind of seems like that's what's happening, is like there is a development, like things change in
Mm.
like their understanding, or at least their belief in God and spirituality and all of that. And so like I think we still are doing that. And like it didn't end with the Bible. Like I guess the Bible stopped being written because a bunch of people sat down and decided that it should stop being written.
Mm.
But anyway, that was just like some of my thoughts from the last episode as I was like trying to process it, at least for me personally. And I know that like for you, like that was a new understanding of faith for you, and like that's great.
Yeah,
But
it's strange because, and maybe we put this on hold for to talk about the review, but like I'm definitely in that place too of like trying to figure out who am I, and like both just kind of reflecting upon life experiences that brought me to where I am. And I think, I guess maybe I'm doing some multitasking in that I'm figuring out who I am, what I value, but also trying to figure out, trying to honor the different possibilities that have been allotted to me by
yeah,
my life experiences, by the research and the studies that I've done. I don't even know if research is a weird charged word. I think studies is a better word.
yeah,
So, I mean, I've not seen a lot of the original texts and stuff like that. I've just studied other people's work on it. Anyways.
yeah.
So before we dive into that, and talking about like both of our journeys, kind of trying to figure ourselves out, we received a review
Yep,
on
on the Apple
Apple.
Podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a 3-star review.
Yep.
And it didn't really provide any, well, I guess it provided criticism and uh,
Something to
guidance
change, and
within,
a
yeah,
call to
something to
action, I
change, a
guess.
call to action within a concise, a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? I used it last
Abrasive. I
episode.
mean,
Abrasive
the title of it
comment.
just said use the Bible, and I'm like, why? Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to use the Bible if I don't want to.
It's interesting. Well, I mean, I think that especially when, like, in the meat of their, like, the body of their review,
Yeah.
it was more a matter of like whenever we're referencing it and referring to it, like it would be a good idea to quote the chapter in the verse. But it's like I'm torn in that, because like on one hand I can see why that would be valuable, especially for anybody who might not be familiar, or maybe they're a new Christian, they're trying to figure those things out. But on the other hand, once upon a time there were no chapters and verses. When people referred to the
No.
Bible, and when the Bible referred to itself, you're just expected to know what's being talked about.
Ooh, get
And
him.
so
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no. I mean, it's like valid because like there are certain situations where it probably would have been helpful to like just do a quick like what verse is that if people want to look into it and like want to, I don't know, fact check us, or like I guess
mhm.
just see exactly what we're talking about, because not everyone like super knows the Bible super well, and so they might hear that and be like, I have no clue where that is. Though, they could also Google it themselves.
Mhm.
And like also in my mind, it's like a ripe 7:30 in the morning, and like we are talking about very deep things, but like we're not necessarily like doing like a deep study into things.
Yes, exactly. We're
Um
not here
like our
to
yeah.
prove a point or to teach anything. I think if that was our goal, then it would probably be warranted to have chapter and verse. And maybe if we're trying to make a point, it would be helpful to do that in the future. But for the most part, right now, we're just kind of unpacking our understanding, unpacking the just everything, deconstructing. And in doing
Yeah.
that, we're just kind of casually having a conversation. Like I am talking with Micah, and Micah's
Yeah.
talking with me, and just the style of our conversation isn't one where we're trying to cram, like we're not trying to
Yeah, yeah.
argue about what different passages of scripture mean so much as we're referring to, hey, this is a passage of scripture that rings in my mind, and this is my present interpretation and understanding of it. Whether or not that's true isn't necessarily
Yeah.
the point. It's like our feelings towards what our understanding of that passage is are valid, and that understanding came from our life and our experiences and
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
engagement with the church, and that's valid, even if it's not necessarily a valid take on what the actual passage is, but we are totally open to learning about that. In fact, if you want to find the YouTube version of any of our episodes and correct us or give us a different way to look at a passage that maybe we talk about in the comments of that video, we'd be happy to receive that. Like, we're not shying away from knowledge. And now it might not be necessarily a time in our life where we're going to straight away dive headfirst into that and devote a ton of time and energy and thought into it. But
Yeah.
I appreciate it personally. So
Yeah. No, feedback is good. And I'm sure to some people this just sounds like we're trying to like, uh, I don't know, excuse ourselves, make ourselves feel better for like getting a 3-star review. And to that, I say, whatever, man. Like, just if you're trying to look at the negative and everything, then that's cool. But like, not like that's just not really the style we're going for. And like, there's some times where maybe just to, like, make it a little more helpful for people.
yeah.
But like, we're just gonna keep doing what we're doing because like this isn't a deep study. This is just a conversation between two guys trying to figure out life.
Mm-hmm.
So
Now, I mean, if you listener think you have a really strong argument for why that might not be the best way, maybe it's harmful or damaging, I don't know. I think it's fine, and Micah thinks it's fine. But if you want to make that argument, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll probably read over it and consider it, and we'll maybe talk about it. But yeah. So Micah, you're at a point, if I'm understanding correctly, and let me know if I'm wrong, or maybe if you feel like you've progressed past this point already, but you're at a point in your deconstruction and journey of trying to figure out who you are. Like, who is Micah? What are Micah's values? What are Micah's goals, apart from any plans or intentions of a higher power? Is that right?
hmm yeah, that, and also apart from, I guess, the church and my
Mm,
upbringing and like what I always thought I was. Yeah, so I am trying to figure that out. Yeah.
yeah. So
Did you
how
want me
is
to
that
continue? Oh, okay, go ahead.
yeah, how has that journey been progressing? Like, what pulled you into that journey and realizing this was something that you needed to do? And what course of action have you taken to make progress in that?
Yeah. Well, in the church, it's your whole identity is wrapped around your like beliefs, like your
Mm,
whole identity is like, I am a Christian. And like that is, and that is a statement of your belief in God, and in like particular the Christian God. And so like when your identity is completely wrapped around that, and like they say that's supposed to be your number one identity, unless you live in some really interesting churches right now that say you're an American first and then a Christian, then you're just weird, I think, if you're
mm,
going to call yourself Christian. But um so whenever I started to question all of that and be like, I don't know if I'm that anymore, and especially like finding my identity in like me as a worship leader, because like that was
mm, mhm,
also a huge part of who I was and what I thought I was going to do the rest of my life is like lead worship, teach other people how to lead worship. Like I would have loved that in my past life. And so once I started to lose those things, I kind of had to have an identity crisis by necessity, because like what did I have? Like I was losing myself, I felt like,
mm,
because
mhm,
um especially the worship leading part, like that part is just gone. Like I am not going to do that anymore. Um
mhm.
and then the Christian part is still like, I don't know, like I doubt it, but we'll see.
Yeah.
You know. And so with that, it's like, okay, apart from what I always thought I was going to be, who I thought I was, and like even this religion that I've been a part of, and like, who am I? And how do I figure that out? Because it like seemed so easy for a long time. I just identify
Mhm,
with my beliefs. I just identify as a Christian, like someone who wants to be loving and stuff. But then I
Yeah, it's
had to,
amazing how much Christianity like offers in terms of kind of a shortcut for figuring things out. Like when it comes
yeah,
to ethics, it's like, oh, I don't need to wrestle with the ethics of right and wrong in the situation. I just go with whatever this popular Christian interpretation of the Bible is.
hmm,
Or
yep,
I don't need to wrestle with who I am. I just need to leave that up to God, and God can define me.
yep.
Yeah, it creates an interesting dependency, I imagine.
It does. And like there's comfort in that because you don't have to think about it, right? You don't have to
Hmm.
like you don't have to wrestle with it and those uncomfortable things because it's set out for you. And that is like kind of proven to be something that I guess you find comfort in. You find comfort in thinking you have all the answers. You find comfort in thinking that you have it all figured out. And then once you realize that like nobody does and like you definitely don't, it's like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, this is anxiety inducing, but at the same time, it's so good. Um, and so I
I feel
had to
like
start to learn.
I feel like when you finally start to recognize that and make those changes, it puts you like you spend a lot of your life when you're in that space and you don't realize it, but you're in a very fragile space. And that's
Yeah.
the moment something happens in life, there's so many things that could happen in life that will shake and possibly shatter that sense of security and thinking you have it all figured out and thinking you know who you
Yeah.
are. And so I think uh, the way I relate to what you're saying, Micah, and that's the
Yeah.
comfort that comes with recognizing that that's not necessarily like maybe it's more complicated than that. And embracing that moves you into a place where now you're equipping yourself with full knowledge and awareness of, or at least as much as you have at the time, of the way the truths of the world to the extent of your knowledge. You recognize you don't have it all figured out and you learn to exist in that space, and it makes you such a much so much, what's the word, it makes you a lot stronger of a person, a lot more
Yeah.
stable of a person. You know who you are, whether these things pan out to be true or don't.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And to what I was saying, like I think that actually the comfort is found in not questioning basically because like
Mm-hmm.
it's just easy. But then
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable to like start diving into all of those things, but you like you said you become a stronger person and a lot more sure of yourself through that process. And then like I don't want to say the end of the process because I think we're always going to have questions and dive into that, but like once you've been shielded from like every hard question and from like any bit of something that could shake your faith, then when it all hits you at once, then yeah, it's gonna get you.
Mm-hmm.
But like people make it through that and are much stronger for it. Um,
Hopefully.
hopefully. So I've had to learn to start separating those things of like, Christianity says I need to be this way, and like this is who I thought I was, and then like who am I? Like it's not like I didn't have any part of myself in that. It's like I wanted to be a
Mm-hmm.
loving person, and like my old self would have been like I want to be like Jesus. It's like okay, well how do I kind of like I guess I can still want to be like Jesus because I think Jesus was cool, but
Mm-hmm.
how do I separate myself from the religion? It's like well I just my identity is like I want to be a loving person, and that's just like who I am. And so like taking the I guess uh my beliefs not my beliefs out of it, but I guess my belief in God and like believing that like God has like defined that for me, but like
Mm-hmm.
oh wait no, like that is just me all along.
Yeah.
That has been a big
You're
part of my
shedding
journey.
light on what it really was.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And so even like thinking of like worship leading, what do I do with that? Because like that is a very specific thing, like to like lead worship or lead like people in music
Mm-hmm.
worshiping a god. And so like how is that part of my identity? How do I separate I guess what I really enjoyed about that and then like
Mm-hmm.
who I actually think I am apart from that? And
Yeah.
it's like, well, I love making music. I love creating music and I love helping people like feel emotions through music that bring them to
Mm-hmm.
a better place in themselves, with people around them in the world, like, and so that as a part of my identity is me like separated from, I guess, the religious aspect, and like is
Yeah.
getting down to, I guess, the core of who I am.
Yeah, it's really a beautiful peek into what has been the underlying motivation from the start. Like, because
Yeah,
of course, when you were in worship leading, like you found some amount of life and value in that.
I
And
did.
so that is true and valid. And it's cool to hear that as you're unpacking what that was, you're finding it, you're figuring it out.
Yeah, yeah. And it's definitely not been easy because, when you're oriented around your belief in God, and then you all of a sudden are not oriented around that,
Mm-hmm.
like you're like, where, what is up, what is down, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's you're like flying through space almost, because you're like, I don't know what to, like, like, I just think of like a planet like orbiting something, like I don't know where gravity is, and
Mm-hmm.
where what I'm supposed to orbit around. And so yeah, it's it's been like a tough journey, but like I feel like I'm definitely not through it, but I've definitely come to a much better understanding than I was a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been very, very much worth it. Um, but like right now, yeah, kind of, I guess what you asked in the beginning is like me trying to like separate myself from my identity from like God and like my belief in God or non-belief in God. That's kind of what it has been like, is just kind of like separating those things and leaving room for obviously the possibility, if there is a God, that like
Mm-hmm.
that can still come in, but like that's not going to be the center of like who I am, because I'm going to know who I am now apart from
Yeah.
that. So if I end up believing in God, then like that'll just be a part of my beliefs rather than like my entire identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be. I mean, we talked a little bit about this in the last episode about how important it is to really start to figure out who you are and what your mission is and what your values are before you really start to align yourself with something that's like some movement or identity that's ethically charged, such as God or religion. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's such an interesting thing, and it's one of those things, like especially coming from our background, there's a lot of wrestling to be done with like for me especially, uh I constantly feel the need, and maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not. I constantly feel the need to justify what I'm doing within
Yeah.
both contexts. And I think
Yeah.
maybe it's not, I honestly don't think it's a bad thing, because I find myself in a position where I recognize both possibilities and I kind of hope for both possibilities in different circumstances.
Yeah.
So to I feel like there are different parts of my life, different ways that I conduct myself, different actions that I take, which honor both of those possibilities. And so one of those things is trying to make sense of my own journey and unpacking who I am within both contexts. And especially within like the whole idea of like the context of God. And I feel like this is why I get excited about the different understanding of faith that I found. And then also
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
excited about just from our conversations, like thinking more about how like God made us these very complex beings potentially.
Hmm.
Assuming that, honoring that possibility, God would have made us these very complex beings and very multidimensional, filled with these desires and with a will of our own, potentially, depending on how you look at that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it would feel incredibly, I don't know, offensive, or it wouldn't feel like we're honoring that reality to just throw ourselves away and just be like, oh, I cannot trust the person that potentially God has given me to myself, like the
Mm.
person God has made me to be. I have to throw that away and become that cardboard cutout to be pushed by God's goodness. And somehow, I don't know, it's somehow we are like in this middle place where we decide which force of we want to be pushed by, the forces of good or the forces of evil. And that's like we're just this little binary light switch. I feel like that's what Christianity especially has this temptation to reduce every person down to, are you
Yep.
a light switch turned on for good, or are you a light switch turned on for bad? And it's like,
Yeah.
that feels incredibly
It's
disrespectful of,
reductive
like,
and
reductive and
yeah.
disrespectful of what is true, what is in reality.
Yeah.
Mm.
Definitely. Yeah, before I ask you like I guess how your journey has been on that, I just wanted to say like something you said reminded me of how like it's just so easy almost like I think it's why people get sucked into
Mm.
like cults and stuff and even like Christian cults, so I would call some churches, is because like everybody's seeking a sense of worth and identity and purpose, and if there's a space that's going to give you that, and then also give you people who are going to affirm that in you, there's so much comfort in that. And I think that's why people get so stuck in cults, is because like you have all these people affirming your identity, telling you who you are, telling you your purpose. And it's just like, it's comfortable to have those answers. It's comfortable to feel
Mhm.
like, this is like who I am. But then like, you're also in a cult, you know? It's
Mhm.
like, and
Yeah.
so it's hard to break free from that because you've been given what you seek, like what you were seeking in the first place. And then for you to like break away from that and try to seek that on your own, like that's why it like frustrates me like in comments when people are um like people who are telling like their cult stories and like getting out of them, they're like, well, why didn't you just leave? It's like, you don't understand. Like, I don't think you understand.
Mhm.
Even me just like leaving Christianity, like I don't say that like any of the churches were a part of were cults. Like, I don't think that's a fair way of describing them at
Mhm.
all. But it was hard for me, you know, because of those exact reasons. And
Yeah.
so like just if you're one of those people who's like swung to the other side and is just like, why don't you just leave? It's easy. It's like, no, it's not. It's not that easy. Um,
Mhm.
because of this whole identity thing, you're gonna have identity crisis immediately, and
It's
that's not
weird
easy.
because, yeah, like, it's so complicated, the amount of things that come with it, and I almost feel like, but the thing that comes to my mind is like TurboTax and like taxes. And maybe it could be a whole lot easier than it is, but there's people that lobby to make it complex, such that
Yep.
it's so complex that we feel like we need to now have this dependency upon this external organization that makes it simpler, but still not as simple as it could be. And so that's what it feels like sometimes. And it's like, oh, when I belong to this religion, a lot of that work is done for me. Like, I
Yeah.
am told
Yeah.
who I am. I don't need to figure that out. I am reduced down to this moral binary, and I just got to make sure that the switch is flipped the right way. Everything is simplified. Everything is explained. I don't have to wrestle with the mysteries of the universe and with different possibilities allotted to me by my limited knowledge and understanding, because it's all spelled out for me. And
Yeah.
so to then relinquish that, you're throwing yourself into a situation where it's like, now I have to do my taxes myself without the
Yep.
assistance or the aid of this software. And
Yeah.
I've never been equipped for that.
Nope.
And and it's just made more difficult by possible. I'm not saying that maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but maybe there's some authority within the church that is just making it more complicated than it needs to be. Maybe there isn't. Maybe it is
Mm.
just a complicated thing. I don't know. But it kind of
Yeah.
feels like that. There's this dependency that gets this multi-level dependency, really, that gets established whenever you're in
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
system, where it's like, I
Hmm.
depend upon you for my identity. Depend upon you for my community. I depend upon you
Yeah.
for my level of knowledge and understanding of the world. And
Oh yeah.
without it, everything is so much more complicated in a life that's already super complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's very complicated. Um, that's a funny analogy. Churches TurboTax. That's what I got from that. I'm just kidding.
There
But
you go. The
yeah,
Cliff Notes.
yeah. Cliff notes. Church equals TurboTax. Make with that what you will. So as you have, kind of gone through the process of questioning and kind of evolving your faith, what has that process looked like in relation to your identity? And yeah, how's that been?
Yeah, and that's been a very interesting journey. Like, for a lot of my life, like when I really started to try and figure out who is Christian and define myself when I was really young, the place that I turned to for that was actually, in my mind, it was kind of God, but it was also just work, what it was I produced, and
Yeah.
that I wanted to align myself to do God's work. And so I really leaned into the projects that I was working on,
Mm.
which funnily, none of them ever really came to fruition. But
Oh.
I leaned into them and identified myself with them. And it wasn't until I had this conversation with somebody and I was trying to tell them about who I was that they challenged me on that. And they're like, but who are you? Like, I know I'm hearing about your projects and your work, but who are you specifically? And that was my
Yeah.
first time to really reflect upon, oh, who am I? I honestly have no idea. Apart from my work and these projects, I have no idea who I am. That's weird.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so from there, I leaned heavily into like theology and apologetics. And I was like, I'm going to make this my identity. And
Yeah.
God will define me through my seeking of him. And it was weird because, like, to use the whole idea of like faith and honor that possibility that I recognize, it's that when I poured into that, I started to realize I had less and less faith than I realized. And it was kind of tough because life became more and more complicated the more and more I understood. And the more I knew, the more and more I realized I didn't know. And so
Yeah.
I found myself in this position where it's like I was trying to make this my identity. But then it left me in this place where I have no idea even what even is all this. Like there's so
Yeah.
much to unpack there, and I don't even know what is true. So that attempt to put my identity into there left me in this limbo to then try and figure out, okay, well, maybe this is just where I am. Maybe my identity and who I am exists in this space. And the more I started to embrace that and recognize that, I the more comfortable and the more I kind of came into myself, I feel, and that it's a beautiful world. Like the complexity of the world, the wonder that is left in it, the uncertainty that is in it. From the outside, it looks terrifying because you have all these answers and you have no idea how you're going to exist in that space. But when you're in it,
Yeah.
when I'm
Yeah.
in it, it's like, this is a beautiful space. And I'm definitely still on that journey of like trying to figure out how to exist in this space.
Yeah.
And part of
Yeah.
that is like figuring out how do I honor the different possibilities that I recognize without sacrificing a different one? How do I explore these ideas and these possibilities without becoming a like, I don't know, attacking and being this offensive force, and just trying to figure all that out.
Yeah.
There was one other thing I was going to say. I forget
For
what it was
sure.
though.
Yeah. It like you talking about I guess like having all the answers and the world being like this scary thing until you start to realize like the beauty in it. It just made me think of something that now it's out of my mind and I don't know where I was going. um, let me try to regain it.
Well, I remembered what I was going to say, so I'll say that, and then maybe it'll
Cool.
help you recall what you're going to
Maybe.
say.
Probably not.
But
Yeah.
are we getting to that point? We just need to drink some more coffee,
Probably. Even though my heart is already like racing.
right? The anxiety. So part of my attempts to figure out how to exist in this space of uncertainty was kind of what led me to. I wanted to engage in community. I didn't want to exist in this space just within the echo chamber of my own mind, because I feel like that's where a lot of the fear can reside when you isolate
Sure.
yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
So I started to engage in like Facebook groups at first, and started to try and direct message people over Facebook and just engage with as much diversity of different people as I possibly could. Like I was in atheist Facebook groups. I was in Tim Mackey Facebook groups. I was in apologetics Facebook groups. I was in theology Facebook groups. I was in agnostic Facebook groups, just as much variety as I could to engage with as many communities as I could, just to try
Yeah,
and
yeah.
understand what was going on. And eventually, TikTok became a thing. And I actually
Yeah.
entered into TikTok like towards the beginning, I would say, of like the rise of the deconstruction community. Unless it was
Yeah.
just around for a while longer than I realized, but it felt like it was just starting to pick up
Yeah. I guess
at that time.
the deconstructing community as we know it. I mean, that it's been around a long time,
Yeah,
but on
people have
TikTok,
been deconstructing
it's
for a
kind
while.
of unique. Yeah, it's a unique space. But yeah, go ahead.
I have a theory that the Ear Biscuits podcast with Rhett and Link, I have a theory that they are the ones who really kickstarted the whole movement and didn't even realize it. But that's
The
apart
current,
from the
maybe
point.
the modern, yeah, maybe
Maybe
the modern one
the
as we know
modern
it.
like expression of it. But yeah, so eventually my journey led me into making my TikTok, and my TikTok kind of evolved into an expression of that journey and an invitation to anybody who wanted to kind of be a part of that community of figuring it out, engage with me in that. And eventually it led to me to reach out to you because I felt like you were in a very similar space and your headspace was somewhere where you could go on this journey with me. And that led
Yeah,
to this podcast. And it's been a beautiful, wonderful thing. I've really enjoyed our conversations
yeah,
and
yeah, for
highly
sure.
value them. And so now I'm in this space, still trying to figure it all out, but I have a community. I have a good friend, Micah. My wife has been on this journey with me, and she and I have been engaging with it. And she is just super incredible. And she challenges me in wonderful ways and has just been such a
Yeah,
proponent. Like this, my whole journey, like honestly, it's been disproportionate the amount of different things I've been talking about and not mentioning my wife. She has been huge in this whole
yeah,
thing, both challenging me but also keeping me grounded. Anytime I would swing too
hmm
far one way, she would remind me that maybe there's still value this other way, and
yeah,
vice versa. And so she has just been an incredible partner just throughout this whole journey, and I'm so
yeah.
grateful to her for that. But
That's awesome. Yeah,
yeah, I'm grateful for where I am now and hopeful for where it'll take me.
for sure. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I guess I didn't mention like I guess most people I've probably mentioned before that I'm married and my wife has been on this journey with me as well, and we very much have been doing it together. Like we are in different points now and have been in different points like all throughout the journey, but still like just our love for each other. Like we talk about these things and like, help offer our perspectives and like grow each other in that way. And like, yeah, I definitely think both of us are lucky to have been going on this journey with our spouse when a lot of people like
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case, and like they don't have the privilege of um being able to talk about it openly with their spouse without
Mm-hmm.
some major conflict. And so we definitely recognize that we are lucky in that, because I know that this
Mm-hmm.
has ruined marriages before. I've seen it happen, and yeah, so
Yep, it's
it's
tough.
good we both have a partner. Glad for you.
Yeah, glad for you too.
Yeah.
Was there any other facet of this particular topic that you're wanting to share about or explore?
Yeah, I guess let's try to maybe talk about like I guess I don't know if like advice is the right word, but like what like maybe some steps forward or like things from our journey that we've learned that's like, hey, if you're
Mm,
starting this journey and you're like, what in the world is going on? Like here are some things you can that we did that helped us, and like maybe you could try them too.
yeah.
So with
Yep.
that, Christian, on your journey, whenever you like started this, or I don't even know if this has just been always like a progression of things in your life, but like what are some things that like helped you in the very like disorienting stages,
Mm,
and
mhm.
like things you've tried or whatever, and like what would you I guess recommend for people who are just starting this, or maybe they've been in it for a while but still it's like just really hard.
Yeah. Uh, I am my approach to the whole thing is it definitely won't work for everybody. But there are two things that I really did that I feel like helped me in my journey and just to figure out things. Well, three things actually. One, I have had a fair journey in figuring out like how to have conversations. If you can invest in your conversational abilities in any way, like maybe find a book about how to have good conversations, or just practice. Like for me, it's been practice. I'm still not the best at it. Sometimes I can sometimes monopolize time or just ramble, but figuring out how to have conversations, and then having as many conversations as you can with as much diversity of people as you can.
Yeah.
Of course, I think it's important to do that with discernment. I'm pretty good at navigating conversations with toxic people, but that's not necessarily something like that's not something that makes me better than other people. 'Cause sometimes even after that kind of conversation, I really need to just take a break because
Oh
people
yeah,
are
for sure.
difficult to deal with. But
Yeah.
I think it's valuable to find people who can respectfully challenge you and
Yeah.
who can respectfully receive criticism and challenges from you. Because the
Yeah.
whole point of learning is the freedom to ask questions, to ask hard questions, and also the freedom to receive questions and to receive hard information. So those are the three things. Really work on honing in your ability to have a good conversation. Find people who you can have conversations with, be it in Facebook groups or in the community on TikTok and in the comments section and direct messages, or somehow where within your real life community, which is just a little bit
Hmm.
harder to do nowadays. And
Yeah.
then third, take breaks. Recognize that you need rest. Like sometimes
Yeah.
I'll dive into a really intense conversation for 3 days straight, and then just like for a month, just not do anything like that for a while.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
so what about you, Micah? Through your journey, what are some things that you've learned and some advice that you might give to anybody who might also be looking to figure this whole journey and process out?
Yeah. I think there's a few things. Like one of them is to just continue to seek authenticity with yourself, and like get in tune with your own like thoughts and emotions, and like and I guess like listen to your body too. Like whenever you're diving into these things, like you're gonna feel very uncomfortable, and like it's important to like or or like stressed, like listen to your
Mm,
body and feel like, okay, I am feeling this, the stress, whatever it is, um, and listen to that. Your body's trying to tell you something. So like, what is my body trying to tell me, and why? And like that'll help you, I guess, maybe try to like process like oh, I'm feeling very much anxiety about this question in particular. Why is that? What is it about this question or this specific thing that is really like making it hard? It's like, oh well, maybe there is a situation where something happened, and like people told me you're not allowed to question this or something, and so now you still have some of that like fear. And it's like try to get to the root of some of those things, because your body is very like a lot smarter than
yeah.
even our minds are sometimes. It's crazy. I encourage people to share their stories too. Like for me, what honestly has saved me through this process is like TikTok and like just sharing my story, not knowing if anybody cared to listen, but
Hmm.
apparently people do. um, and so like share your story, like even if it's not like on a public platform. I don't recommend that for everyone because you're gonna get pushback, and that's not always healthy for that journey. But like
Mm,
find somebody that you trust or that you can share your story with, because there's just something about like having somebody to like be authentic with that really is going to help you, and don't feel like you need to be farther along in the journey to be able to share it, because none of us are going to reach like the end of the journey so that we can share it at some point. Like share it now, share it where
yeah.
you are, because somebody else is where you are, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll hear it and they'll relate, and then it'll just continue to like help you feel like valid in whatever state you're in.
Yeah.
Those are a few
I,
things.
I think that to speak to what you were saying about like finding somebody you can open up with, that could be a close friend or family member, somebody that you trust. But I think Mike and I would both strongly encourage anybody to find like a good therapist, and just
Yeah.
that can also be a good outlet. The relationship there might not necessarily be what you need, so I think that it should definitely be alongside a closer relationship if you can find one. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's
Definitely.
some beautiful advice. I think that if you follow that advice, like hopefully it'll make things easier.
Hopefully, yeah. And then like I think one of the biggest parts of like just figuring out your identity is all the like you maybe you have like a really tight grip on those just surefire fire answers that you were given within your context of religion, or a faith or a community.
Or
Start
lack
to
thereof.
or lack thereof, yeah, like start to let go of the idea that you can have 100% concrete answers, because I don't think for most people you're going to be able to find that. Even though there is comfort in that, like I think it's a process and it's hard, but learn to like find comfort in the unknown, even though it is like an uncomfortable space. And so like letting go of needing to have all the answers is difficult, but it is a part of like it's weird. Like it is a part of
Mhm.
becoming sure of yourself. Is letting go of the idea that you need to figure yourself out like
Yeah.
fully and understand everything about life and what you believe and what is correct,
Yeah.
because you just might not.
And I think that that kind of ties into something that we talked about once upon a time in a previous episode when it comes to identity, in that knowledge and the information that you have, that is not who you are. That is just a
Yeah.
tool that you have to figure that out, to figure out the world. And you have a bunch of different tools in your tool belt for how to express yourself and how to engage in relationships with other people. But it's important, I think, to understand that you are not your tools. And
Yeah.
it's important to reflect upon, like, who am I? What are the relationships that I want? And then which tools result in those relationships? You're not being inauthentic to yourself when you're using different tools because you desire a different relationship. You're not being manipulative. You're operating within a
Yeah.
social space. Now, if you're being inauthentic, if you are leading somebody into a position that you want them to be in inauthentic ways, like you can abuse tools too. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
if I want this person to be dependent upon me for selfish reasons, and I'm going to trick them to thinking that I have different feelings for them than I do in order to get them there, that's an abuse of tools. So I do not
Yeah.
encourage that, but recognizing the kinds of relationships you want and the sort of tools that you need to use to get those relationships and to invest into those relationships authentically, that is figuring out who you are. And I think that that goes with your relationships with other people, your relationships with yourself, your relationships with any spiritual higher power. So I think that distinction is also important.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, that was a very good conversation, I think. Some big
I'd say so.
some big things we covered there
Hmm. Stuff to unpack and reflect upon, and
and ponder upon.
yeah, and to continue to ponder on this ponderous morning.
Indeed. Yeah. So, with that, where can people find us?
Yes. My mind was like, how do we exit? I forget. I'm glad you
Yeah.
remembered. You can find me on TikTok at Truth Voyager.
And you can find me at Pondering Together. And you can find our combined TikTok of our highlight reels at Morning Ponderings on TikTok.
Mm-hmm. In the description of this episode or any episode that you're watching or listening to, you can find a link to those places and a link to where you can support us. If you want to support us financially, we will not turn you down. We're not necessarily doing this for money or dependent upon it for money in any way, but if you want to give us free money, you can totally do that. We encourage you to, whatever platform you're on, leave a review or follow, subscribe, whatever that engagement looks like. And then also, we love to hear your thoughts. And so if you want to go to the YouTube video version of this, or just leave a review with this in it, just share your thoughts. We'd love to dive into it and read those. And if you think that we deserve more than 3 stars as a podcast, then maybe leave a
Help us
review
out a
on
bit.
Apple.
Yep. Help us out, please. Anyway, good stuff.
All right, guys. You have a wonderful morning, or whatever time it is you're listening to this.
Indeed. Until next time, have a good one. Yeah, 7:40.
Hey,
Just about.
we're making all right progress.
Yeah, we've already had pretty good conversation, I think.
Yeah.
Coffee's helping me today.
Indeed.